Again, welcome back to your CISM exam overview. So we're going to take a look at what the exam is about and what the topic areas that are going to be covered when you sit to do your exam. The exam is 150 multiple choice questions covering job practice domains. There are 4 domains, and it's really about the job practice and the tasks within those domains and how you then, what is expected in terms of how you're going to approach that. Questions are not grouped by domain during the exam. They're just random, okay? They're delivered throughout the exam, randomly throughout the exam. So you're not going to see like a grouping of domain 1 or grouping of domain 2, while you can, suspect that this is a domain 1 question or this is a domain 2 question. It's not really going to help you doing that during the exam, right? So don't worry about the domains. Really focus on the content of the question as you go through. We're going to do another review at the end of the course where we're going to run through again how you're going to approach the questions. What are the specific things you need to do in terms of how do we address the questions to make sure that things don't go haywire and we actually interpret the questions correctly. What are the job practice domains? We got our 4 domains here. You got governance, risk management, program development and management, and of course, information security, incident management. These 4 domains really lay the foundation for the approach, understanding and execution of a proper, well-defined information security program. Okay, this is what it looks like in terms of the percentages. Domain 1 is about 24%, so that's governance. Domain 2, which is risk management, 30%. Domain 3, program development and execution, 27%. And domain 4, 19%. So you're probably saying 19%? Yep. Incident management, which is what everybody seems to be screaming about because it's the front end or what we call the tip of the sword. That's the piece that everybody sees, is really the smallest portion of information security. And the reality is that if you go through the other steps properly, particularly governance and risk management, the program development then begins to get, something to work with. And then in terms of the incident management becomes very, very small because of how the organization is running. Now, if you remember in our introduction module, we were talking about how you have the security principles, sustain the organization and stuff like that, and that every person within the organization is part of your security team. In that context, because of those things, precisely because of that, your information security incident management becomes a very small part because they're operating in a security relevant manner. So this is something, that's a cool looking sword if you're into swords, but this is something that I like to use as a continual symbol of security. It's the early symbol of security. People will carry their sword and, you have your guards with your swords and stuff like that. Swords was the first real combat thing. You had stones and stuff, but yeah, right? So swords were the first designed instrument for security. And it does have relevance in terms of how we address security today. So if you look at security, what you see, and let's pump through what this looks like. You have domain 1, which is governance, is the handle, right? Without the handle, the sword is practically useless. There's nothing to hold it with. There's nothing to guide it with. You can't do anything with the sword if it doesn't have a handle. And that's where governance is. Governance is the handle that guides the rest of the sword. So you're seeing how important this governance is. If you don't have it intact, if it's not put together properly, the handle just falls off. Okay, so you want to ensure that the handle is done very well, which is the governance structure that is actually informing the information security decisions. Then you have the guard, right? That is your risk management. Of course, the guard then protects the hand that wields the sword. Good. So if you look back here, you see the guard, that little T point across there. That's protecting the hand that's now wielding the sword to ensure that the sword itself can do what it's designed to do. So risk management in a real sense protects the organization so the organization can do what it was designed to do. That's your guard. It's understanding what's going on within the environment that the organization's operating in so that it can continue to pursue its objectives. So you're saying, well, okay, cool. Let's talk program management now. That's your shaft, right? Or the main portion of the blade. Oops, here we go, right? That's the main portion of the blade. That long piece that, you sharpen the edges of, right? And the edges or the tip and so on will then be your incident management. But your shaft, right? And you've seen this in, various movies and so on. But particularly, if you're going to use the sword, if the shaft is bent, then it's useless. If you try using a knife in the kitchen, right? For those of us who like to cook and stuff like that, if you try using a knife in the kitchen and the shaft is bent, it's not going to work really well, right? You're going to have to try and maneuver things around this bent shaft, this bent blade, okay? So program management, right, is that shaft that puts the incident management following the directions of the governance managed by risk, okay, so the hilt, managing the risk there, that then puts the business end, the edge or the tip of the sword where it needs to be, and that business end is incident management. So your sword works together nicely to then protect the organization. And this is what security is about. It's about sustaining and extending the organization. So that incident management, the edge, the tip, can then do what needs to be done, and it can be placed where it needs to be placed. So all those other pieces, the governance, the risk management, the program management, need to work properly together to ensure that the tip is then able to do its job. Of course, if the tip is dull, then it's kind of useless, right? But if you look at, let's use like a normal knife in your kitchen, the knife has a little, you'd realize that particularly those chef knives that are supposed to be pretty sharp, they have like a little lip on the handle, and that's kind of the guard to prevent your hand from sliding off onto the knife and getting itself cut. So that then, and of course you can see where the shaft, if the shaft or the blade itself is bent, then you can't cut up stuff with it properly. It's going to be weird. And of course, when you get to the tip, if the tip itself is dull, pretty much all the other effort that's been made, now you really have to work really hard with a dull tip. So all the pieces need to be operating as a nice symphony. And within a symphony, you'd see in the big band, there are a bunch of different instruments, but they're with all different roles and responsibilities, but operating together to create that wonderful sound. This is what you want to create within the organization as regards information security. So these are your swords and domains. The sword and the domains again, right? Governance, the handle. Risk management, the guard. Program management, the shaft. Incident management, the edge or the tip, the business end. So the basis of the exam is on your job practice. The job practices are described in terms of task statements and knowledge statements, right? So you'd have job practices for each one of the domains: governance, risk, program management, and incident management. So you'd want to be then, what we're going to do is going to look at the task statements and how the knowledge statements then connect to those tasks so that we know how, or gives you context in terms of what's required for the task. Okay, so the task statements would be specific tasks the CISM candidate should be able to perform. What are they going to be able to do? What do we expect somebody who is certified as a CISM, what do we expect them to be able to do? Then, of course, you have the knowledge statements. Knowledge statements then will help enable the candidate to perform the tasks. So what knowledge is needed to perform this task? Okay, so if I'm going to cook some food, for instance, so I want to make a potato salad, right? You'd have to know, well, I need to boil the potatoes. And how much do I need to boil the potatoes? Because potatoes for potato salad is different for potatoes for mashed potatoes, right? So the knowledge that's needed to then create a proper potato salad. And everybody has their own view of what that needs to look like. But you get the idea. Okay, so questions are then formulated to validate that the candidate has the knowledge to perform a given task. So the questions would then look at, well, okay, what do we need to understand, say, for instance, to create a potato salad? Okay? And if you bring that in the IT context, and I know not many people build machines nowadays, but we need to understand what goes into a machine so that it can actually work properly. So what are those components? How do those components need to work together so that the organization that, the machine that you're building will meet its objective? And you can, if we go back to our machine building days many moons ago, one of the things you're thinking about, well, okay, what are you going to use the machine for, right? So we start talking to the governance, right? What's the direction that the machine is going to be used? What's the intent, okay? And then you could pick components that will put those things together to deliver on the intent. And pretty much with security, that's what we're doing, okay? So we're looking at those tasks. We look at the knowledge statements. Let's talk exam questions. Exam questions developed around the idea of practical knowledge. Now, what would you do so they're not theoretical? A lot of this stuff that comes in the exam is pulled from some experiential context. What are you actually going to do in this situation? Now, for many of you doing this course, you'll be thinking, well, some of the stuff that we'll discuss, it'll be like, but the answer to that question should be this. And the challenge with that, because this is what we do in our organization, what we got to realize is that what we do in the organization may not necessarily be correct. And I want to encourage you to trust the material. The reason being is that the research that we've done over the years with ISACA and so on and stuff like that, and I have implemented a lot of what ISACA has said regarding security and a number of other things too. What we then begin to realize is that organizations are generally quite dysfunctional, and we operate in a dysfunctional manner. Therefore, what you're seeing in terms of the things that you should be doing may not align very well with what's going on in your organization. The good thing, though, is that once you start aligning it with what you're seeing here and what we're seeing in terms of security, a lot of stuff starts to happen correctly. It starts to work well. And it's all those pieces that need to come together. As we looked at the sword, we saw all the pieces that need to come together to actually make things work properly. This is what we'll be doing in the exam. The exam is going to pull those things from the practical application that we talk about here. So the questions are all multiple choice, so there are no essay questions. They're designed to have only one correct answer. Now you're going to see some questions as you go through the question bank and so on that would then be like, well, yeah, all those are correct. Well, one would be more correct than the others. So there's some that you'd have the outlier on, but others, most of the questions will come in the context of all of them being some level of right, but what is right in the context of the situation. Okay? All right, so they're designed always to have only one correct answer based on the question that's being asked. Okay? They're all scenario-based. Well, single scenario-based questions, and then you have a scenario that they will give you in the exam. Now, not all the exams have that, but you'd have a scenario-based question. They provide a description of a situation, and then you'd have several questions based on that situation. The situation given is all the information that you need. Okay? Rest assured, it is all the information that you need. Some students tend to look at it and say, well, hey, I don't think they presented enough information. Then you're probably not reading the situation properly. Know that all the information you need to respond appropriately to the questions will be provided in that scenario. Okay, and you're required to answer 2 or 3 more questions after that. Okay, so how do we then answer the questions? Answer all, right? There's no penalty for wrong answers. So every question you answer is a 1 in 4 chance that it may be the right answer. So if you don't even understand the question, or you think that, well, I don't know what that answer is, make a guess. You have a 1 in 4 chance of actually getting it right. Okay? Grading is based solely on the number of correct answers, not there's no fancy minus this because they answered that question wrong. None of that kind of stuff. It's just straight out. Did you get this right? Boom, we're done. Good. Move on. That's a mark. Okay. So I was kind of giving you a little quick overview of the exam and how we then therefore approach that exam, right? What we then do, we're going to run through this again at the end of the course with a little more detail in terms of how the questions are constructed and what would then be your approach to the construction of the question so that you can then derive what would be your correct answer.